So we're in 1 Timothy, and we're on the qualifications of overseers and deacons. A couple of weeks ago when we hit this and passed through here, we hit on just the first part in chapter 3, 1 Timothy chapter 3, verse 1. We hit on this, this saying is trustworthy. If anyone aspires to be an overseer, he desires a noble work. And that was also part of what we were praying over this morning, is that God would call out those people who are supposed to do the noble work. Sometimes we can get too far into the, church leaders, they're supposed to be ordained church leaders that are so different from everybody else, and that nobody ever wants to become one because it's so high and lofty. And it ain't. And other times we get so far the other way and the pendulum swings over to this side where it's, well, do we really actually even need any separate church leadership? Aren't we all equal? And we are. We're all equal before God, and we're all of equal worth before God. But ultimately, the old gospel ship, to use the imagery that has come and gone so many times over the centuries, ultimately there's got to be some folks that know a little bit more about tying knots and putting up sails to be able to help guide it. And that's what the overseers and ultimately overseers and deacons are a part of in a church. Now, we use the term overseer here, but understand Peter talks about the overseers or the bishops or the elders, and he talks about the overseers, the bishops, the elders who shepherd the flock well, and he uses the verb shepherd, which gives us also the word shepherd that we take the word pastor from. And so when you see the traditional Baptist understanding of this is when you see overseer, you should see pastor or church leader. Don't see it as that we're supposed to, well, I mean, I can see over all of y'all, that's why I'm up here. I can't quite see over Gary, and I can't see over the monitor to see Jacob. But I can, but that's not what we're talking about. It's not a management or a boss role. It's still more of a guidance and a shepherding type of role. But when you see that term overseer, that's what's going on. And it's a noble task. There are some people that God calls to that above and beyond and slightly differently. There's a difference in being a Sunday school teacher and being a minister of the church. There's a difference in being a musician and being the person actually called out to be the worship leader, the person who helps teach the church through music within the church. There's a difference there. And it's not a bad thing to aspire to that task. In fact, it's a noble thing. It's not for everybody. Just like everybody can't do whatever jobs that you do. Everybody can't be a doctor. Everybody can't be, better than a doctor and be a nurse. Everybody can't do that. Some people are just not cut out for it. Some people aren't quite smart enough to be nurses and they become doctors, right, ladies? Yeah. I'm looking at this row right here because I got the two of them right there. You've got some things, different people called to different things, different parts of life. But it's not a bad thing to ask that question, and in fact, it's a valid question, especially as you wrestle with, am I doing what God wants me to do with my life? That's a question to ask. Should I be a church leader? Should I be a pastor, a teacher, a missionary, an evangelist? Don't ask if you should be an apostle. You can't. All of them saw Jesus alive on earth. It just doesn't work. That door is closed. Okay? But anyway, so if anyone wants to, he desires a noble task. And then we get into the requirements. Now, an overseer, therefore, must be above reproach. Everybody got that? Somebody wants to be a minister? They should be above reproach. Everybody understand that? Good. Moving on. The husband of one wife. Everybody got that? Good. We'll move on. Actually, we're going to read all this. We'll go back and work through them. The husband of one wife, self-controlled, sensible, respectable, hospitable, able to teach, not an excessive drinker, not a bully but gentle, not quarrelsome, not greedy. He must manage his own household competently and have his children under control with all dignity. If anyone does not know how to manage his own household, how will he take care of God's church? He must not be a new convert, or he might become conceited and incur the same condemnation as the devil. Furthermore, he must have a good reputation among outsiders, so that he does not fall into disgrace in the devil's trap. Because if you can take down a leader, then you can hamper the rest of the body. If you think about it, that's where difficulty comes in. If you take out the shepherd, then the sheep become easier prey. If you take out the sheepdog, the sheep become easier prey. If you take out the big-horned, grumpy sheep that tends to headbutt everything that comes around, then the rest of the little lambs are easier prey. And so, that's part of the devil's trap. So we'll back it up to the beginning. Must be above reproach. So what does that even mean? Well, now you've hit something that folks have argued about for a long, long time. Above reproach. It doesn't mean perfect. Because if it meant perfect, then you'd never have anybody in ministry. Because the only perfect person to walk the earth and minister and shepherd the flock of God is the good shepherd who laid down his life for the sheep, and he has ascended to the right hand of God the Father, and someday is coming again to judge the living and the dead. In other words, when he actually does physically show up, church is over. Okay? Jesus is not coming back to preach. I mean, just go back and reread the end of the book again. Read that. It's not when he comes back and he is, the rider on the white horse with the sword. That's it. He's not coming back to say, oh, and by the way, this is what this is how you should reorganize your Sunday school. Because when Jesus returns, Sunday school is over. So above reproach can't be a requirement of sinless perfection, because that's unattainable. So I think you have to take this and understand that it's above just blatant, general, obvious, a sinful life. A life that hasn't grown in faith. Above reproach. Not somebody that you say, well, I'd love for him to, he'd probably make for a good preacher, but, he can't even show up to church 3/4 of the time. In that era, in the era that Paul's dealing with, and in Ephesus, well, yeah, we know he's mostly going to church, but he's also spends time over there at the temple of Aphrodite, and he spends time doing this. And, when they're trying to pump up stuff to sell at the temple of Artemis of the Ephesians, he's still down there doing that. And so there's just some questionable things in his overall conduct. Above reproach. Beyond reproach. Beyond somebody who, in general, folks would be able to say, well, if you look at his ongoing behavior, it's certainly not a positive reflection on Christ. It doesn't mean that you can't sin, but it does mean that you can't live a life that you're not at least trying to avoid it. And on top of that, if you walk face first into the wall, that you back up and repent and ask God for forgiveness, and then maybe even at times take a break. Okay? There are folks that are in ministry that they stumble, they fall, and then God restores them. But there's a gap in there wherein they restore their reputation. But if you find out one week And you hear that this great famous preacher, one week he's on TV and apologizing and saying he's really sorry for the affair that he had and all of this and all this terrible sin, and he's going to step aside, and then the next week you read in the paper the announcement of the brand new church he's starting up on the far side of town. Folks, it's not somebody who's taken the time to be above reproach. They've gone crashing straight through reproach and into bad things. Above reproach. This is also not, in all honesty, this is not a history reference. This is not where you look at somebody who's 50 or 40 and say, oh, wait a minute now. When he was 12, he used to be a real big pain in the neck at the junior high school. Back when he was 12, we still had junior high schools. It's a long time ago. Now we have middle schools and stuff. Oh, back when he was, here he is, he's 45 years old, and I remember when he was 16 and he first got his car and he was just a terrible person. Folks, that's us dredging up ancient history to throw at people. That's not a person's character now being a problem. Now, if he's still as immature and terrible at 45 as he was at 16, he's not above reproach. You see the difference? We have to allow for the fact that people grow and people mature. Sometimes we're not great at that because we remember what they were like. You remember having him in the nursery? Can you imagine him being a deacon? I remember when he was 3 years old in nursery and he hogged all the goldfish crackers and we're talking about him being a deacon at 50. But we remember what he was like in the nursery at 3. Well, maybe he's grown up a little. There's a distinct possibility there. Okay? Above reproach. It also doesn't mean he never makes a mistake. Good night. I mean, these days, yeah, everything's on social media. By the way, y'all that put everything in the world that you do on Instagram, stop. 20 years from now, you're going to regret it. Because you'll do something and you won't even realize how dumb it is, and somebody will dredge it up 20 years from now that cannot comprehend that you've grown up in those 20 years. And they just want to beat you with a stick for it. We already see it where folks that are in their early 20s were doing it at 16, and now they've lost jobs over being stupid when they're 15 and 16. For the record, the average 15 and 16-year-old is not only tends to be immature, but they're kind of entitled. They're only 15 and 16. You know, we're past the point of the world making 15-year-olds be able to be adults. That's not where we are. We haven't raised them to be that. You want 16-year-olds to be adults, you've got to start them in that direction when they're 2. But above reproach doesn't mean that they don't occasionally make mistakes. You should go back and, if you could find a VHS player and find VHS tapes, I think I've burned them all, of some of the first sermons that I preached. Some of the dumb things that I have said. You can go back and ask people from previous churches that I served. Some of the ways I've screwed up as a minister. We don't have time to go through all that tonight. I assure you. And that's not me trying to be, he's just being mocky. Anyway, I have offended people. I have hurt people's feelings. I have said wrong things in sermons. I've gotten stuff wrong in sermons. I've said just goofy things, not meaning to. Referenced hunting for a 150-pound turkey one time. Y'all, the turkeys don't get that big. In my mind, I was thinking about the fact that one I bought and had in the freezer was 15 pounds, and I thought, well, real live wild ones got to weigh more than that. And in my head, I did the math. I doubled 15 for 30 and came up with 150. I mean, just, and that one's just silly. And I didn't even realize what I had said till I said it, and everybody's staring at me like, what? That was the end of that sermon. I preached for another 30 minutes, but that was the end of that sermon. Above reproach doesn't, you have to give people space, especially as they're growing in ministry. You have to give them space to make mistakes. They're going to do things wrong. All right, the husband of one wife. Or, as the NIV, I think, translates it, a one-woman man. And I think that they're a little bit overly influenced by George Jones. But the Greek is an ambiguous statement that actually, if you quite literally translated it, that's exactly what it would say. A one-woman man. Because keep in mind that in both Greek and in Hebrew, the word for husband is the same as the word for man. And when the word for man is in man, not humanity. That's a different word. Okay? Man, husband. The word for woman and the word for wife are the same. There's also a third word which is for humanity. Like the room is filled with humanity because there's man and woman present. Okay? There's three different words that show up. And so one woman, man. So the husband of one wife. And this is a spot that we get into some difficulty. And different churches and different traditions have taken it different ways. Some have taken it to mean that they've taken just the most obvious base meaning of it. And that is one wife at a time. No polygamy. To be a minister, you can't have two wives at once. It fits with the culture in which it was stated because it was not an uncommon thing. Why would it matter? Because the picture of marriage in the Christian church and in the Christian life is supposed to be a reflection of Christ in the church. And Christ has but one bride, and that bride is His church. Also, because by the time you've got, if you've got a household that has multiple wives and you've got the whole polygamy thing going on, you ain't got time for anything else. I mean, there's just a whole lot of things going on there, and there's a whole lot of stresses. And so there's a lot of reasons that basic meaning is absolutely certain. One wife at a time. But then we get into where folks tend to argue. Does it mean that you can never have been divorced and remarried? Does it mean that you can never have been widowed and remarried? Does it mean that you can't marry someone who has been married to somebody else? There are folks who will make an adamant case all up and down the line that for a minister, first of all, they'll make this case, since it talks about the husband of one wife, that single people can't be ministers. Now, argue that one with the Pope, because the entirety of the Catholic Church is based off of the idea of a celibate clergy where none of their ministers are married. But the implication here is the expectation you would be old enough to be married and mature enough to be entrusted with a wife, because you had to have a level of maturity for that. Again, I think that's another reason why you see in our general culture that the average age of marriage is rising. 3 generations ago, folks getting married at 16 and 17 was not unheard of. In fact, it was common. And you know what? People got married at 16 and 17, and then they stayed married for 75 years. I had some dear friends that they got married. Her mama had to sign for her because she was still 15. They got married, were together for 3 days, and then he deployed to Korea. As the Korean War is happening. I mean, that far back. They're still married. Happily so. Because it was just normal. You did that. Nowadays that's kind of raised. The age there, I cannot imagine. I don't know very many 15-year-olds I think are ready to get married. They're just not there yet. But that has risen. And I don't think it requires that somebody be married, but I think there ought to be that question, what's the maturity, what's happening in somebody's life? And if they're not married, that's fine. But it does say husband of one wife or a one-woman man. So what about somebody who's been divorced and remarried? Some traditions say, nope, that's it, that's a permanent disqualifier for ministry. Some traditions will look at it and say that it depends on the condition of the marriage. Why did it happen in the first place? Some folks, for example, did get married before they were truly ready. Some folks got married before they were saved. And then they got divorced. And then they got saved and then married somebody else. What do we do with those and all that? And you start splitting hairs and trying to figure it out. I think the expectation here is that if you're going to lead the church, you have to be somebody who has kept your wedding vow, which was till death do us part. That's what I think it means. I think it is till death do us part. That means that if your wife left you because she decided that she didn't want to be married to you anymore because she got tired of being a preacher's wife and haven't helped them, you should meet some preacher's wives and realize some of them are married to some really crazy people. If you think your preacher's wife's got it rough, you should meet some of the people she knows. But there comes a point, and at that point, no, I'm staying faithful and praying that God turns your heart. Now, that's the way I would take that. As a church, we interpret it in various ways, and it matters because it's about your ability to honor God with your commitment. Now, the next question: what about somebody whose spouse passed away? Well, I think your wedding vow is till death do us part. And once death hits, not to be too blunt about it for those of you who have gone through that tragedy, but you fulfilled your vow. And so somebody who then remarries after that, I don't see that as a violation of being the husband of one wife. Some people do. I actually have several very close friends in the ministry who have talked about that, and their statement has been, I hope I never have to live this out, but if my wife passes, then I'll be resigning my church before if I ever look to remarry. I don't think it's necessary, but I'm not their boss. The Lord is. Now, we get into some weird spots with this because I was a member of a church as a teenager that, and it falls under deacons, and by the way, husband and one wife shows up under deacons as well. They had a man that they refused to ordain as a deacon because he and his wife had divorced and he had remarried. And they refused to ordain him as a deacon, and they refused to ordain him as a deacon, and then his first wife died. And the next time that church held deacon elections, they elected him a deacon and ordained him. Because, well, since his first wife was dead, now he was free to remarry. Except that this is a character issue. The idea of being a husband of one wife is that you held your vow and you didn't go chasing all these other women who are out there. Because the husband of one wife, or the man of one woman, a one-woman man, George Jones does hit it straight. I don't look at anybody else. I am a one-woman man. That's who I am. Not turned aside by this or by that. That's who I am. That's who I should be. Now, do you get special cases where, well, it was a long time ago and they've proved that their character has matured? I think you can talk about those on a case-by-case basis and look at the person. I know some people who have done some amazing things in ministry, and they were folks who were abandoned by their spouse, and then years later they remarried. And there's always an exception, but the general rule, in my mind, should be that you've lived out your marriage vow and you've upheld it, and that that's what you've done. I think that's the requirement that we're talking about here, because it's followed on by self-controlled and sensible and respectable. Self-controlled. If somebody has to be micromanaged to do everything that they need to do, then they don't need to be in ministry. You should be able to tell somebody in ministry, hey, this needs to be taken care of, and then they take care of it. Self-control. You also shouldn't have to attach a chaperone to them. For example, let's say this past year I went to Birmingham, Alabama to the Southern Baptist Convention by myself. You should be able to trust me with that. That I would be self-controlled. That I wouldn't get there to Birmingham and just go hog wild in the bars and the dens of iniquity that are scattered around Alabama. Because after all, in Muscle Shoals they got this, and in Birmingham, some of you don't know what rock song we're going down there. And except for that one trip to the barbecue joint, I was pretty self-controlled, but that stuff was good. I don't know how long they had cooked that pork, but they had cooked it so long I didn't have to chew it. It was glorious. Self-control. Can you trust this person? If you put them in the midst of a situation, can they control themselves? can they refrain from just grabbing hold of an obvious temptation and follow down? And again, some of your biggest temptations are to chase after folks that you're not married to. Pornography is a major temptation. If somebody's self-controlled, do they fall into that ditch? Money, somebody's self-controlled with that. Sometimes we put up fences just to be safe with that. For example, somebody asked tonight about, hey, I forgot to put tithe check in the plate. Will you take it? My answer is just always no, so that there's never a question whether or not I was self-controlled with the church's money. I don't want your money. I think I put the safe, it's all taken care of. We found a solution that kept me away from it, but self-control. Tomorrow I head to Dallas. Can I be self-controlled while I'm down there, or will I do all sorts of weird and crazy things? Will most likely not do anything strange and crazy. I will be in seminars on the New Testament and listening to a presentation on ethnodoxology. And hopefully I'll have a better definition of what that word even means by the end of the night tomorrow night. Self-controlled. By the way, if you aspire to the noble task of being an overseer, of being in ministry, here are some things that you should work on with your character. Are you above reproach? Are you training yourself to be the husband of one wife? Are you training yourself to be self-controlled? You see, self-control is both a fruit of the Spirit, but it's also a discipline of the mind and of the heart. The self-controlled person looks at the clock and realizes, if I don't go to bed now, I won't be able to get up tomorrow before I have to go to work and read the Word of God. But man, it's only the second quarter and I really want to watch the rest of the game. The self-controlled person makes the right decision about how to honor God with that.
That's what DVRs are for.
The self-controlled person is able to look at various things and say this. Sometimes the self-controlled person realizes that if I get into a situation, I will lose my self-control, and so therefore I'm going to hand this off to somebody else because I can't handle it right now. That also falls under the, not tending to quarrel that comes up in a few more verses. I'm going to be self-controlled, and we're going to wrap up here in about half an hour. This is a 32 gigabyte card and a video camera. I can go all night if I need to. Got to be on the road 4 anyway. Might as well preach till then. So, but when we get to that, not quarrelsome, in other words, not easy, not ready to pick a fight, self-controlled about it. Sometimes walking away. We're going to hit a couple more and then we'll be done. Sensible. If somebody didn't have the sense enough to come in out the rain, don't put them responsible for the church of the living God. Y'all, we're country folk for the most part. We understand what that means. If somebody doesn't have just basic common sense, sensible. So, what do we need to be teaching our young people? To be above reproach, to be faithful to their wedding vows, to be self-controlled, to have some good common sense, respectable in the way that they handle it. This is where things like the way in which you carry yourself, the way you react to things around you, even the humor that you use with folks matters. Because you can be funny, you can also be funny and harmful, thinking that you're still being funny and just making it the other person's problem. But respectable means that you're concerned for how other people perceive your actions. And I know we're all worried about, well, people are just too sensitive these days and snowflake syndrome and all that. But realize something, you can destroy folks deciding that it's always their problem if I'm not respectable. Guess what? It's your problem if you're not respectable. It's your choices. You saw this, and I hate to keep coming back to football, at least until Washington wins their next game. Go Tigers. But you see this, and it's in culture right now. Talking about Thursday night where there was a fight at a football game. And one player snatched another guy's helmet off of his head and then turned around and swung at it and hit him with it. And it's, well, but that's the guy that started it anyway. Whether he started it or not, it's not respectable to take a blunt object and club somebody upside the head with it. It's not respectable. You're responsible for what you do. Respectable. Such that people can say with a straight face, that person has earned respect. Now, are certain people entitled to your respect whether you think they've earned it or not? Absolutely. You get pulled over between here and home by a guy with blue lights and he comes up and he's got a big badge on and he comes up to the side of, you best better respect that man or that lady. Even if you don't think, because Saline County's got lady detectives, even if you think that a woman's place is not in the sheriff's department, you best respect her. Because she got a stick and cuffs, and she can take you away, and you can not sleep in your bed tonight if you get disrespectful. I'm not talking about those folks who can demand respect whether they've earned it or not. We ought to be, if we're going to be church leaders, those who are going to lead, we ought to be looking at being respectable, that people would choose to respect us. Your boss, you have to respect. One of the people that I was very pleased to meet several years ago, and I've talked to him a couple of times, and on the one hand, I bet he would, I wouldn't expect him to remember me, but I almost think, given his character, he would, but Major General of the United States Army. And on the one hand, the stars require that you've got to respect him. And all the other things here, the Purple Heart with the repeat sign on it, that not just once but twice, wounded in combat, and all these other things that, he has every right to walk in the room and demand respect, and yet in the way he carries himself, he was very, very respectable. And it didn't take long. But this is a man who was on his way to be important and be on a platform in front of 10,000 plus people, and who saw the sheriff's deputy that was working security at the Southern Baptist Convention and stopped, turned around, went back down the stairs, walked up to the sheriff's deputy and said, "I'd like to shake your hand and thank you for your service." It's a respectable man. Respectable. Hospitable. Hospitable does not mean that your house is always perfect. If so, y'all need a new pastor. Because as hard as they work, trust me, I make a mess. Okay? Hospitable does not mean that the curtains and the couch and everything are perfectly coordinated. I mean, some people, that is their hospitality, is that their home is just this beautiful showplace, and you walk in, and the tea is exactly right, and there's 14 forks, and it's all laid out beautifully. And that's hospitality. And they're able to put on something that makes you feel very, very important by being around them, because this is a big deal. This is a state dinner. This is what it's like, when the President of the United States puts on the white tie and tails, and everything is formal and proper, and there's the Queen of England, and everybody's, stands and sits and drinks with their pinkies out, and all of those things that are going on. There's a picture of me in my high school yearbook, and I'm drinking. I'm at a National Honor Society event, and I'm drinking. I've got my pinky out looking all proper. I'm drinking the rest of the punch after National Honor Society inductions out of the pitcher, but I've got my pinky up. And actually, right and proper, chugging out of a gallon Tupperware pitcher. Like I said, respectable is about now, it's not about then, okay? I still own the necktie I'm wearing in that picture. Anyway, but hospitable, do they try to make you feel welcome around them? Church leaders, deacons, again, this comes back to how do we make people feel? Are we willing to use our home and what we have to extend and bring people as a part of the family of God? And this does not mean, and I'll look at Walter and Dina right quick, and we'll isolate them because they're church leaders. They have small children at home. It is not them being inhospitable to put up a sign that says, "It's nap time. Don't ring the doorbell." send me a text message and tell me if you really need to talk to me. And I don't know if y'all have a sign like that or not, but you should. It's not inhospitable to do that because that's meeting the needs of their family. That's not an inhospitable activity. It would be inhospitable if they had barbed wire and a moat, with sharks in the moat, with lasers. I knew you were going there. That's inhospitable. Inhospitable is, oh no, we don't ever want to. Hospitable is, come on over. You come to my house, I will give you whatever's in the fridge, you're welcome to share in it. If you'd have come today, you'd have had some really good Korean barbecue beef tacos. Don't come tonight, you finally left. We ate it all. It felt good. Hospitable. And then able to teach. Able to teach requires a couple of things. One, the ability to learn and to grow your own self. And two, the ability to convey that information. Able to teach. Somebody wants to be, and this is why, for example, before you license someone to preach or ordain someone to ministry, you should hear them preach more than once or twice to see if they're able to teach. You should put them in a room full of people and have them have to teach the Word of God. Because if you can't teach, you can't help the flock to grow, because the flock doesn't grow because of what the preacher knows. They know because of what you hear from those who teach and lead the church. So I'm going tomorrow and I'll spend several hours in the New Testament with several experts in the New Testament. And it'll be great, and I'll love it. But the trip home from Dallas Tuesday night will be heavily vested in thinking back through everything that I've heard and trying to process how to repackage that information to help us as a church grow in our understanding and our knowledge of Jesus, that we may grow in our reaching into this community to share the gospel with folks. Because it's not just able to learn, but it's able to teach, that we can pass that on. And so those who want to be leaders, that's where we go. And we'll pick up next week we'll do Thanksgiving dinner together down there. Remember, we're going to start at 5 for that. Because we're going to eat so much that we're going to have to roll on up out of here by, that way we can have time to eat, fellowship, and relax. But we'll pick up eventually on not being an excessive drinker. It's interesting, pastors are told not to be excessive drinkers, and deacons are supposed to be not given to much wine. Doug and I have decided that what that means is that the deacons are not allowed to drink more than I drink. And since I drink none, that tells you how much they're allowed. But we'll get it. We'll touch on some of those things and look at what that means. But ultimately, this is about character. Paul is telling Timothy about the needs of character. It's not just a checklist of, well, we check this off. It's not just a checkbox, for example, husband of one wife. Well, okay, he's still married to the same person he's been married to. How's he living as her husband? How's he behaving? How is he behaving to be respectable? Not in this one moment is he respectable, but how is he behaving overall? It's a character test. It's a character examination. It's not something that you can easily fill out. So pay attention to that. And there's 2 reasons that we're going through this. One is to understand what we should have, what we should be if we're going to have church leaders, and to give you some tools to evaluate people who are church leaders, who are preachers and teachers, because they're everywhere now. 30 years ago, I could stand here and say, oh yeah, don't buy this one book from this one guy, and warn you away from bad teaching. Now, you got 400 channels of bad preaching coming into your television if you got satellite. And if you're on the internet and you're listening to podcasts, y'all, there are thousands of them, and many of them are lousy. How do you evaluate that? There are hundreds upon hundreds of Facebook pages that you can like and have them beam theology right to you. And most of it is bad. How do you make that evaluation? Because I'm not going to be able to sort through all of it for you. You got to sort through it yourself. The second is this. As a church, we need leaders. And we have to grow leaders. From time to time, God blesses and drops somebody in who's got that already taken care of. But we have to grow folks into that place. And these are things that we should be growing everybody to, because nobody's going to be hurt by being above reproach and being respectable and self-controlled. It doesn't hurt anything, even if you're not a minister. So we need to see what we should be not looking for in the next generation, but raising up the next generation, teaching them to be and to have as a church. What are the standards that we should be aiming them towards and living out in front of them that they can see in our lives? So, let's pray together and we'll go home.